So what I would recommend you start doing is that with your life. Start with some simple questions if you want. If you can't receive the answers, you can even ask, why can't I receive the answer? But that's a more complicated question, isn't it? And therefore going to require a more complicated answer. And if we're not open to that, then it's going to be hard to receive those answers. But the key, I found, for me, the key was to yes or no right at the beginning, because that's real simple. And you can feel the answers, emotionally feel the answers as you proceed. But you're going to have to open up your emotional senses. And this is why we had the discussion with you yesterday about the mind. Because for many of you, your emotional senses have been so shut down from the mind, right? And that's why we need to address those issues about the mind and its dominance of your soul. Okay? So the real thing then becomes, well, how just do you do this in practice? Like if you think about it, it's pretty easy. What's the question you want to know? You tell me a question you'd like to know. You see, I'm doing this with you every time you ask a question. I'm not going, what's the answer to that question? I'm going, what's the answer to that question? And then God shares a whole heap of information with me and I just share it with you. That's why everything I say to you is off the top of my head, as people would probably be aware, right? It's not like I've thought about it for centuries beforehand or hours before, and I'm thinking, what is it Evo would like to know about? I try to work out that and then come up with what Evo wants to know about. When Evo asks a question, I ask God, well, what's the answer? And there's the answer, so I tell Evo. Does that make sense? It's like, and then I also know the answer for myself too, because sometimes I haven't even thought about what you're asking. Sometimes I've given it no thought at all. And so you ask a question, I'm going, wow, yeah, never thought about that, but here's the answer. Do you know what I mean? And this is what you're able to do when you're connected to God. Like, God wants to share truth with you. And I know there are some things you want to know that I haven't asked about. You know? But the beauty of being connected to God is if you ask it, I can answer it. So that's good. And you can too. That's good too. So what do you want to know about right now? Anything come up? Let's go.
Yeah.
Yep.
You always talk about humans on different planets and stuff. I almost always say this planet. So I was curious, are there more planets? Are there more human civilizations out there?
Just a
quick question.
Is there other human civilizations on other planets?
Yeah. Is there other civilizations on other planets? Is that the question? Okay. So now we're going to have to be sincere. Do you really want to know that? How many of you are totally bored with that subject? Be honest. Yeah, you're not going to get an answer, right? Simple as that.
But those people who are interested.
Who are you interested in that subject? Right, really interested. You've got to be really interested. Okay, so you're really interested in that subject. Okay, so if you're totally bored with the subject, it's pointless even trying, right? If you're really interested in that subject, how do you develop a sincere desire to know the answer? Like, can you see you have to formulate the question for yourself, emotionally, formulate the question, feel, okay, why do you want to know? So can you answer that question, why you want to know?
I guess I'm looking for like stuff like purpose. What is the reason?
Okay, so really it's a poor motive. Can you see why? It's a poor motive because I'm not sincerely wanting to know. I want to know for my own sake, which is a selfish desire to know. So you're hoping that the answer will provide you some significant motivation for your life in terms of your life's purpose. And that's not going to be the result of this answer. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So this is where we have to be sincere, right? We have to really find out, why is it I want to know that? Now, the reality is, maybe I shouldn't tell you the reality. You should ask God what the reality is first, probably. And then we'll talk about it a bit more about that one subject. But let's first just go through the process of asking, right? So who of you felt you were sincere and you really want to know? Can you see now it's like 5 of us who really want to know. And you can see why, can't you? Because a lot of times it's because we have these ulterior motives in our questions. And so what I did, if I noticed any ulterior motive, and particularly this is what I do now that I still carry some sin, which I didn't do in the first century, but what I wanted to know, I've got to be really honest about whether I'm really sincere about knowing or not. And the very first thing is I try to, am I sincere? Yes or no? You can be sincere about asking whether you're sincere. Does that make sense? And God can even tell you whether you're being sincere in the moment. Right? So so the very first thing I would do if I felt, I'm a bit suspicious, whether I'm sincere or not, I would ask God whether I am sincere, and God would say, when you receive a yes from God, it's usually a confirming emotional response. When you receive no, it's like nothing. Just nothing. No, like you don't get anything. Because if God gave you a response, then you'd think yes. But so there's nothing that comes from God. So when there's nothing coming from God, I know the answer's no. Does that make sense to you? If nothing's coming from God, I know there's 1 or 2 reasons why. One reason why is because of my development, or the other one is no. And I just mostly assume no and go from there. Let me continue. So let's ask the question. Those of you who ended up being sincere, have we analysed that? Yep, sincere about it. And you really want to know just for the sake of knowing. Yeah? That's what it's about, knowing for the sake of knowing. Not knowing for selfish reasons, but knowing for the sake of knowing. Now, once you know, it may change your future decisions. Of course. But to be sincere, you have to just want to know for the sake of knowing. Yeah? Know the truth because you want the truth. That's it. So what's the answer? What's God's answer? God will give the answer straight away. What do you feel, those of you who want to know, what do you feel is the answer to that question? Is there human life on other planets? What's the answer? So of those of you who wanted to know, how many of you think yes? And how many of you think no? Okay. So you got your answer. And people see, when you say that, people say, but that's surely not how it works. It's too simple. It doesn't make any sense. And what if you really wanted to think that there was when, well, you'll get no answer. It's the answer to that question. So you can find out. Now, how's that affected your life, that question? Can you see it's hardly affected your life at all? Isn't that true? It's like, okay, now I know that. Well, what do I do with knowing that, right? And so, to my mind, there are some questions that are like, well, once you know that, so what? And then there's other questions like that is a very significant thing to know for my life right now. Very significant to know right now these particular things. So put some priority system into it and some thought into it. God likes you being, passionate about a thing, but also think about things a bit logically as well. This is where you can use your mind and you can say, well, once I know that, how does that affect me? Well, if you were a scientist, you may want to find out how to discover and prove there is human life on other planets. You may even want to know where they are in the universe, in the so-called universe that we on this earth think we know about so far. You might want to know that, so that you can direct your telescope in that direction. Your radio telescope that can hear and receive beams of radio information. You might want to put that out there. So you might be a scientist and you're really passionate about the idea, and you go, well, there's this whole 360 degrees in a 3D version of a thing that I can point my telescope. Where do I point it? And if you want to know, then God can tell you, point it in this direction. Of course, it may not help you because on this earth, one other question I asked God when I asked God that question was, are we in an advanced enough state of civilization to communicate with those other Earths? That's one of the questions I asked. And the answer to that was no. So if I wanted to build a telescope, I wouldn't bother doing it for that purpose, you know, because we're not in an advanced enough state as a civilization to properly receive and properly process and deal with the answer to that question. So God's told me that. Now, we might be in the future, I don't know. I don't know when that will be. It might be in 20 years' time. If everybody received God's love to the point of at one moment, there'd be no danger to you as a society then, would there? Knowing there'd be no dangers to the other society when you started trying to communicate with them. Right? So God's considering these things, of course, and God doesn't want this society to influence the other society in a negative manner when they already have their own problems. So one of the questions I did ask is, what are the problems of those societies? The answer to that's pretty clear too. Same as yours. Same as this society. And that, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense. But you can see that if these two societies that have got current fundamental problems got together, you can see the problems might even be worse as a result of that. And of course, God's not going to encourage that process. Even if humans decide to do it, God's not going to encourage it because it's out of harmony with love. But the beauty of doing this is that you can also ask things like, and see, I have one advantage in that I've met some from those other Earths. Yeah, in our union state, there's actually other people like myself in those places who also entered the union state, and we've managed to talk. Fascinating talk because we've got very similar emotions. You know, being one of the first persons to discover love on a planet, God's love, you go through very similar emotions, right? So that's the feeling we have for them is like they're our brothers because they've gone through almost the same things. But if you didn't know all that, and I didn't, there was a time when I didn't, we can just ask. Yep. Of course, a lot of times the significance of the answer is lost on us. Yeah, which is true too.
Jesus, can I just ask you, draw something out here? Because you said you ask questions, and if you get nothing, you think it's a no.
Yeah, I assume it's no.
Yeah. So my experience with my conscience at this point in my development is far more, I suppose, I want to utilise the conscience to help me to learn truth about my own condition. Mm-hmm. So the way I kind of experience the conscience often is a very strong, almost like sinning, not sinning. Does that make sense? Can you sort of speak about that? You're sort of talking about factual truth, but for me it's a very like, am I on the right track here, God, or am I actually in a state of sin in this relationship or in this situation? And in those cases, I get a very strong, I guess, pull, like sin. Yeah.
So the reality is, if I receive nothing, then I know that I need to be more definite about my questions. Yeah. It's probably the best way to say it. If there are times when you're going to receive a definite no and you'll know it's a no, right? And there are times when you'll receive a definite yes and you'll know it's a yes. And there's many times that I've seen spirits, you know, I've encouraged spirits to go through the same experience and they receive a definite no or yes. And then because many of them are open emotionally, they also receive a package of why it's no or why it's yes, right? But that requires more emotional openness. And at the moment, as a group of people here, you're quite shut down to your feelings and emotions. So, you know, very mind dominant. And so initially you're going to have to just experiment with this process And you're going to get quite frustrated at times about it, but you're going to have to experiment with it. And you're going to have to get to the stage where you start trusting your soul faculties rather than your mind. Because your mind's going to be screaming at you, why are you doing this stupid thing? Does that make sense to you? You're going to be thinking, why am I even trying this crazy thing to do? It's like, doesn't make any sense to me. Doesn't make sense why it's going to work, you know, because we've shut down emotionally. You see, in the first century, for me, I wasn't shut down emotionally when I started trying it, so it was easy to engage it. But the more shut down you are emotionally, in this life, I was so shut down emotionally, as I said, when I was 33, I couldn't do this at all. I had to first open up emotionally before I could even begin to do it. You know, one of the first things I opened up about emotionally in this life was, is God unhappy with me? That was a big... when I was in my early 30s, I was in a religious faith that I left, and that religious faith said I was condemned to eternal destruction by leaving. And I was indoctrinated in that faith. So I even began to think that I was condemned to eternal destruction by leaving, right? And it took me a few months to work through emotionally that the feeling that I was condemned, and you know, my family didn't want to talk to me, as I said, my friends, nobody wanted to talk to me. It took me quite a few months to just work through that emotionally. So I had some big cries about, you know, nobody wanting to know me anymore, nobody wanted to talk to me anymore, being alone. You know, people walk down the street and they would like stare hatred at you almost, you know, and it was pretty harsh, and it felt pretty bad. And I had to work my way through those emotions. But then after a while, I got to the point where I was brave enough to just ask God, have you condemned me eternally? Yeah. And the answer to that question was no. That God hadn't condemned me eternally, yeah? And then once I started going like that, I go, you know, so I started asking questions again about why, you know, what, you know, because, and I got the fundamental beliefs that I had were actually all false. The fundamental religious beliefs I had at that stage of my life were all completely false. And God told me that, like pretty plainly actually. Yeah.